Have you ever looked into the eyes of the people who raised you, the people who were supposed to shield you from the harshness of the world, and realized that they were actually the ones holding the knife? They say blood is thicker than water. They say family is a sanctuary, a bond that cannot be broken by the greed and malice of the outside world. But what do you do when the wolves are not waiting outside your door? What do you do when the wolves are sitting at your dinner table, smiling at you, passing the bread, while quietly planning how to strip away everything you have ever loved? My name is Julian, and for 32 years, I believed in the sacred bond of family. I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I sacrificed enough of my own dreams, if I swallowed my pride and accepted their cruel jokes and constant put-downs, I would eventually earn their love. I thought that if I proved my loyalty, they would finally see me as a son, a brother, a human being worthy of respect. But I was blind. I was a blind man walking on the edge of a cliff, guided by the very people who were waiting for the perfect moment to push me into the abyss. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to the day the illusion shattered into a million jagged pieces. It was a cold Tuesday evening in November. The rain was drumming a relentless, depressing rhythm against the windows of my small apartment. I was sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of legal documents that had just been delivered to my door. My hands were shaking so violently that the papers rattled in my grip. The words on the page seemed to blur together, but the names at the bottom were crystal clear. Arthur Vance, Thomas Vance, my father and my older brother. Just 3 years earlier, our family business, Vance Logistics, was on the brink of total collapse. Decades of my father's terrible management and my brother's reckless spending had left the company drowning in millions of dollars of debt. Suppliers were refusing to ship goods, bank accounts were frozen, and the threat of bankruptcy was knocking loudly at our door. My father had come to me, crying, gripping my hands with a desperation I had never seen before. He begged me to leave my stable, high-paying job at a prestigious firm in the city to come save the family legacy. "Julian, please," he had sobbed, his voice cracking with artificial emotion. "You're the only one with the brain for this. If you don't help us, we lose everything. The house, our name, our future. We are a family, Julian. We sink or swim together." And like a fool, my heart broke for him. I loved my father, despite how distant and cold he had been to me throughout my childhood. I wanted to be the hero who saved the day. I wanted, more than anything, to finally hear him say the words, "I am proud of you, son." So I quit my job. I gave up my stock options, my bonuses, and my peace of mind. For 3 years, I lived and breathed Vance Logistics. I worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. I survived on black coffee and cheap takeout. I completely restructured the company's debt, negotiated grueling new contracts with skeptical clients, and modernized our entire supply chain system. I poured my soul, my sweat, and even my personal life savings, over $80,000, into keeping that company afloat. And it worked. By the end of the 3rd year, Vance Logistics wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We had secured a massive, multi-million-dollar contract with a national retail giant. The company's valuation skyrocketed. We went from the brink of absolute ruin to being one of the most profitable logistics firms in the region. I remember the night we signed that big contract. I went home and slept for 12 hours straight, feeling a profound sense of relief. I thought we had done it. I thought my sacrifices had saved my family, and that we could finally enjoy the fruits of our labor together. But greed is a monstrous disease, and it rots the human soul from the inside out. The documents sitting on my kitchen table on that rainy Tuesday evening were an official notice of termination and a total restructuring of the company's shares. While I was busy working late nights in the warehouse, signing deals, and managing operations, my father and brother had been quietly meeting with a corrupt corporate lawyer. Because I had trusted my father implicitly, I had signed the initial restructuring paperwork 3 years ago without scrutinizing the fine print. I had believed him when he said, I was being given a 30% equity stake in the company as a reward for my leadership. But the fine print told a completely different, horrifying story. The equity was conditional, dependent on a clause that allowed the majority board members, Arthur and Thomas Vance, to vote me out and void my shares at any time, without cause, if they deemed it necessary for the strategic direction of the firm. They didn't just fire me from the company I had saved. They stripped me of my shares. They legally erased my ownership. And to make the betrayal even more agonizing, they had frozen the company-linked bank account where my personal savings had been deposited for business liquidity. They had completely locked me out. With the stroke of a pen, my father and brother had stolen my hard work, my money, and my future. They left me with nothing but a month's worth of rent and a shattered spirit. I remember the silence in my apartment that night. It was in heavy, suffocating silence. I stared at the phone, hoping, praying that it was a mistake. Maybe it was a horrific technical error by the legal department. Maybe it was a bad joke. With trembling fingers, I dialed my father's number. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Dad?" My voice was barely a whisper, choked with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Dad, I just received some papers in the mail. It says I'm terminated. It says my shares are gone. Dad, what is this? Please tell me this is a mistake." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When my father finally spoke, his voice was completely devoid of the warmth and desperation he had used 3 years ago. It was cold, calculated, and professional. "It's not a mistake, Julian," he said flatly. My heart stopped. "What do you mean it's not a mistake? I saved the company. I worked myself to the bone. I put my own savings into the accounts. You promised me we were partners." "Business is business, Julian," he replied, his tone chillingly indifferent. "You did a good job fixing the operational issues, but Thomas and I feel that your vision no longer aligns with where we want to take the company. Thomas is the eldest. He is the rightful heir to the Vance legacy. Now that the company is stable, it's time for him to take the reins as chief executive. We need to consolidate the shares to secure a new investment round. Your presence is simply a distraction." "A distraction?" I screamed, tears finally spilling over my eyelids, burning my cheeks. "I am your son. Thomas didn't do anything but spend the company's money on sports cars and vacations while I was working 18 hours a day. You are stealing from me, Dad." "Watch your mouth, Julian," my father snapped, a harsh edge cutting into his voice. "We gave you a job when you needed one. We paid you a salary. You've been compensated for your time. As for your personal savings, those funds were absorbed as an uncollateralized director's contribution according to the bylaws you signed. You have no legal claim to them. Don't make this ugly. Accept it, move on, and don't come around the house. Your mother and I don't need the drama." Before I could say another word, the line went dead. I sat there, holding the phone against my ear, listening to the empty dial tone. The room seemed to spin. The people who had brought me into this world, the people I had sacrificed my youth and health to protect, had just discarded me like a piece of worthless garbage. They had used me to rebuild their empire, and the moment it was safe, they threw me out into the cold. I covered my face with my hands and wept. I cried for the years I had lost, for the trust one had foolishly given, and for the agonizing realization that to my own family, I was never a son or a brother. I was just a tool to be used and thrown away. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the dark, watching the shadows of the rain move across my ceiling. The overwhelming sadness that had crushed me earlier began to shift. It was a slow, subtle transformation. The tears dried on my face, and in their place, a cold, hard sensation began to grow in the center of my chest. It was a feeling I had never experienced before. It wasn't the hot, reckless anger that makes a man scream and smash things. It was something much deeper, much more dangerous. It was a quiet, freezing resolve. They thought they had one. They thought they had used me, broken me, and left me powerless. They believed that because they held the legal documents and the family fortune, I was completely helpless. But they forgot one crucial thing. I was the one who built that empire from the ashes. I knew every contract, every client, every vulnerability, and every dark secret hidden within the walls of Vance Logistics. They wanted to ruin my life? Fine. But they were about to learn that when you strip a man of everything he has, you also strip him of his fear. I sat up in bed, looking out at the city lights through the rain-streaked window. A grim smile touched my lips. You want to see what a distraction looks like? I whispered into the empty room. Just watch. To truly understand how deep the knife cut, you have to understand the dynamic of the Vance family. Growing up, I was always the invisible child. My older brother, Thomas, was the golden boy. He was handsome, charismatic, and athletic. My father adored him. Thomas could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. If Thomas crashed a car, it was an accident. If Thomas failed a class, the teacher was incompetent. If Thomas spent thousands of dollars from my father's bank account, he was just learning how to live large. I, on the other hand, was the quiet, studious one. I was the child who stayed up late reading books, trying to get perfect grades, hoping that a report card full of A's would earn me a pat on the back or a smile at the dinner table. But my achievements were always met with a shrug. Of course you got an A. Julian, you don't do anything else, my father would say, without even looking up from his newspaper. When we grew older, Thomas was immediately given a high-paying executive vice president role at Vance Logistics right out of college. He didn't have to work for it. He didn't have to understand the business. He was given a massive salary, a luxury company car, and an expense account that he used to entertain his friends at high-end clubs. Meanwhile, I was told that if I wanted to succeed, I had to make my own way. So I did. I went out into the corporate world, worked my way up from the bottom at an independent firm, and built a reputation for efficiency and financial brilliance. I thought that by building my own life, I had escaped their shadow. But when the company faced ruin because of Thomas's utter incompetence and my father's arrogance, they didn't hesitate to play the family card to drag me back in. The day after my father hung up the phone on me, I decided to go to the corporate headquarters of Vance Logistics. I knew I was no longer welcome, but I needed to see them. I needed to look into their eyes in the light of day to see if there was even a shred of humanity left in them. When I walked through the glass doors of the building, the receptionist, a woman named Sarah whom I had personally hired and helped when her daughter was sick, looked at me with terror in her eyes. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. Arthur and Thomas. They told security this morning that you're no longer allowed in the building. They changed the key card codes. They said if you showed up, we had to call the police." A cold splash of reality hit me. They hadn't just fired me. They were treating me like a criminal, a dangerous trespasser. "It's okay, Sarah," I said gently, trying to keep my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my throat. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to get my personal belongings from my desk. My photos, my notes." "I'm sorry, Julian," a loud, arrogant voice boomed from across the lobby. I turned around to see Thomas walking out of the executive elevator. He was wearing a brand-new, custom-tailored Italian suit. He had a smug, insufferable grin on his face, and he was flanked by two burly security guards. "Your personal belongings have already been boxed up and sent to your apartment, little brother," Thomas said, stepping forward, his hands in his pockets. Though honestly, there wasn't much. Just some nerdy spreadsheets and cheap coffee mugs. "You don't belong here anymore, Julian. The adults are running the show now." I looked at my brother, the man I had stayed up all night helping just a week ago to prepare for a board meeting he was too lazy to understand. "Thomas, how can you do this? You know the only reason this company is standing is because of my work. You were going under. You were going to lose everything." Thomas laughed, a loud, mocking sound that echoed through the marble lobby. "Oh, please, Julian, don't flatter yourself. You did some basic bookkeeping. Anyone with an accounting degree could have done it. Dad, and I let you play CEO for a little while because we were busy with higher-level strategies. But now that we've secured the big national retail contract, the real work begins. And frankly, you just don't have the image for a multi-million-dollar corporation. You look like a stressed-out clerk. We need leadership with charisma. We need me." The security guards moved a step closer, their faces expressionless. "You should leave now," Thomas added, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper so the receptionist couldn't hear. "And don't bother calling Mom. She agrees with us. She thinks it's pathetic how you're trying to leech off the family success. You've always been jealous of me, Julian, but it's time to accept your place. You're a worker bee. I'm the king. Now, get out of my building before I have you thrown out on the street." I stared at him. I looked past him at the corporate logo on the wall, the logo I had redesigned. I looked at the employees who were peeking out from their offices, people I had protected from layoffs, now looking away in shame, too afraid to lock eyes with me. In that moment, the last lingering thread of familial affection inside me snapped. A profound, icy clarity washed over me. I realized that arguing with them, begging them, or appealing to their morality was entirely pointless. They had no morality. They were sociopaths wrapped in expensive fabric. "Okay, Thomas," I said, my voice completely calm, devoid of any anger or pain. "I'll leave." Thomas smirked, clearly disappointed that I hadn't made a scene, hadn't given him the satisfaction of seeing me beg or shout. "Good boy. Go find yourself a little mid-level job somewhere. Leave the big business to the Vinces." I turned around and walked out of the building. As a glass door slid shut behind me, the cold November wind hit my face. I stood on the sidewalk, pulled up my collar, and took a deep breath. Thomas thought he had one because he had the title, the suit, and the office on the top floor. But Thomas was an idiot. He didn't understand that a company isn't just a building or a bank account. A company is a delicate, complex web of relationships, data, systems, and trust. And I held the master key to every single one of those components. When I got back to my apartment, I found 3 cardboard boxes sitting outside my door. Security had indeed dumped my things. I carried them inside, set them on the floor, and began going through them. Thomas thought he had removed everything of value, but he didn't realize that during my 3 years of saving Vance Logistics, I had kept meticulous, private backups of every piece of data that passed through my desk. I wasn't doing it to plan a revenge plot back then. I did it because I was a perfectionist. I kept copies of every financial audit, every client email, every tax filing, and every private agreement between my father and our suppliers. I opened my laptop, plugged in an encrypted external hard drive that I had kept at home, and began to scroll through the directories. As the folders clicked open, flashing their contents on the screen, a dark realization began to form in my mind. When I was restructuring the company, I had noticed several strange, irregular financial transactions originating from an offshore account during the years before I took over. At the time, I had ignored them because I was completely focused on stopping the immediate bleeding and saving the business for bankruptcy. I had assumed they were just bad investments made by my father. But now, looking at the data with fresh, detached eyes, and with no desire to protect them anymore, the patterns became glaringly obvious. My father and brother hadn't just been bad at business. They had been doing something incredibly illegal. To fund Thomas's lavish lifestyle and cover up their massive losses, my father had been inflating the company's shipping volumes on paper, creating ghost clients, and using those falsified metrics to secure massive, fraudulent loans for secondary banks. It was a classic corporate shell game. When I took over 3 years ago, the influx of legitimate revenue from the new contracts I secured had accidentally covered up the holes left by their past fraud. My honest, hard work had inadvertently washed away the evidence of their crimes, making the company look completely clean to outside investors. A slow, deliberate smile spread across my face as I stared at the glowing screen. They thought they had left me with nothing, but they had actually left me with a loaded gun, and they had no idea I was holding it. If I went to the federal authorities right now with this data, my father and brother would undoubtedly go to prison. The company would be liquidated, and the family name would be dragged through the mud. But as I thought about it deeper, I realized that going to the police was too quick. It was too clean. They would hire expensive defense lawyers, drag the case out for years, and probably settle for white-collar probation or a comfortable minimum security facility. They wouldn't truly feel the weight of what they had done to me. They wouldn't understand the crushing, agonizing despair of watching everything you built slide through your fingers while you're completely powerless to stop it. No, a simple legal report wasn't enough. They wanted to play a high-stakes corporate game. They wanted to use cold, calculated manipulation to ruin my life. Then I would play by their rules. I would let them taste the exact same poison they had fed to me. I would watch them destroy themselves, piece by piece, while they believed they were sprinting toward absolute victory. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and began to outline the blueprint for their total downfall. It was time to go to work. The first rule of a successful counterattack is patience. When someone strikes you, your natural instinct is to strike back immediately, to lash out with rage. But an immediate reaction is predictable, and a predictable enemy is an easy enemy to defeat. I needed my father and Thomas to believe that I was completely defeated, depressed, and out of the picture. I needed them to grow arrogant, to let their guard down, and to fully indulge in their greed. For the next 2 months, I completely disappeared from their radar. I didn't call them, I didn't send emails, and I didn't try to contest my termination legally. I knew they were watching my social media and checking if I was trying to talk to company employees, so I kept everything completely silent. I stayed inside my apartment, working in the shadows, putting the pieces of my trap into position. To bring down an empire like Vance Logistics without destroying my own reputation, I needed a vehicle. I needed a rival entity. During my time as chief operating officer, I had developed a close, respectful professional relationship with a man named Lawrence Sterling. Lawrence was the CEO of Sterling Global, the largest and most powerful competitor to Vance Logistics in the state. Lawrence was an old-school businessman, tough, incredibly sharp, but fiercely honest. He hated my father's arrogant style and despised Thomas's lazy incompetence, but he had always respected me. In fact, a year ago, at an industry gala, Lawrence had pulled me aside and told me, "Julian, you're a Ferrari being driven by 2 people who don't even have a driver's license. If you ever want to work for a real outfit, my door is always open." At the time, I had politely declined out of loyalty to my family. But loyalty was a luxury I could no longer afford. I called Lawrence and arranged a private dinner at an upscale, quiet restaurant on the outskirts of the city, far away from the corporate crowd. When I walked into the private dining room, Lawrence was already there, cutting into a steak. He looked up, his sharp gray eyes assessing me instantly. "Julian," Lawrence said, rising to shake my hand with a firm, powerful grip. "I heard what happened. The corporate grapevine is a noisy thing. Your father and brother are fools. Absolute, short-sighted idiots." "Thank you, Lawrence," I said, sitting down across from him. "I appreciate you meeting me. To be honest, I was surprised you didn't file a massive lawsuit for wrongful termination or breach of verbal contract," Lawrence noted, pouring me a glass of water. "With your track record, you could have made things very messy for them." I smiled faintly, leaning forward. "A lawsuit takes years, Lawrence. It drains money, it drains energy, and at the end of the day, the lawyers win. I'm not interested in a financial settlement. I'm interested in market share, and I'm interested in justice." Lawrence's eyebrows shot up. A slow, intrigued smile crept onto his face. "Market share, you say? Talk to me, Julian. You've been trying to break into the national retail sector for 3 years." I began, laying out the facts calmly. "But Vance Logistics beat you to the massive national contract with Apex Retail Group last year. That contract alone represents 40% of Vance's current revenue. It's the crown jewel that keeps their entire operation highly profitable." "Yes," Lawrence sighed, a frown touching his lips. "It was a major blow to us. Your operational model was too tight. We couldn't match your delivery windows or your pricing efficiency. Correction, Lawrence, I said, looking him dead in the eye. My operational model was too tight. I designed that supply chain. I negotiated those terms. I hold the personal relationships with the regional directors of Apex Retail. And right now, that model is being run by my brother, Thomas. Lawrence let out a loud bark of laughter. Thomas? That boy couldn't manage a lemonade stand, let alone a national retail supply chain. Exactly, I said, and that is where our opportunity lies. I want to come work for Sterling Global, but I don't want a standard salary, and I don't want a quiet advisory role. I want to be appointed as the executive director of a new logistics division. I want full autonomy, a performance-based equity stake, and the resources to build a parallel supply network that mirrors Vance's exact infrastructure, but better, faster, and cheaper. Lawrence leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he calculated the risks. You want to go to war with your own family's company? You want to take them down completely? They are not my family anymore, Lawrence. They are a corrupt entity that stole my life, savings, and my intellectual property. I am simply going to compete with them in the open market, and I am going to win. Lawrence stared at me for a long, tense moment. The silence in the room was heavy. Then he slammed his hand on the table and smiled widely. I've always liked you, Julian. You've got fire in your belly, but it's a cold, disciplined fire. I love it. You got a deal. I'll have my legal team draw up the contract tomorrow. You get your division, you get your autonomy. Show me you can deliver Apex Retail, and you'll be a multi-millionaire within 2 years. Oh, I will deliver them, Lawrence, I said quietly. But first, we have to let Thomas make his first major mistake. The second phase of my plan required utilizing the internal knowledge I possessed. I knew that the Apex Retail contract had a very strict zero-tolerance performance clause. If Vance Logistics missed more than 3 major delivery windows within a single quarter, or if their error rate exceeded 2%, Apex had the legal right to terminate the agreement immediately without any financial penalty and open the contract up for emergency bidding to rival firms. When I was running Vance Logistics, I personally monitored the Apex accounts every single day. I kept our drivers on a strict schedule, maintained backup fleet vehicles, and constantly updated our tracking software to ensure a 0% failure rate. I knew that Thomas, in his infinite laziness, would immediately discontinue these daily audits because he found them boring and unnecessary. He would rely on the systems I had put in place, thinking they would just run automatically forever on autopilot. But a complex machine never runs on autopilot without proper maintenance. Through a loyal friend who still worked inside the Vance IT department, a young programmer named David whom I had helped clear his mother's medical debts, I kept a quiet eye on the internal metrics. Just as I predicted, within 6 weeks of my departure, Thomas had already loosened the driver schedules. He had delayed the mandatory maintenance on our delivery trucks to cut immediate costs and make the quarterly profit margins look higher, so he could secure a massive executive bonus for himself. The machinery was beginning to rust from the inside out. All it needed was a gentle, invisible push to cause a complete system failure. I started my new role at Sterling Global with a furious intensity. Working under a strict non-disclosure agreement, I quietly reached out to the top-tier logistics managers and senior dispatchers at Vance Logistics, the real backbone of the company, the people who actually kept the trucks moving. These were people who loved working with me and hated the toxic, arrogant environment that my father and Thomas had reestablished. One by one, in private coffee shops and late-night phone calls, I offered them positions at Sterling Global. I offered them 20% higher wages, better health benefits, and a workplace environment built on mutual respect and professional dignity. Julian, if you're building something new, I'm in. Our head of regional dispatch, a veteran named Marcus, told me over the phone. Ever since you left, Thomas has been treating us like garbage. He cut our overtime pay while he bought himself a new luxury sports car. The morale here is in the gutter. Tell me, when a hand in my resignation? Not yet. Marcus, I told him gently. Keep your head down. Keep doing your job. I will tell you exactly when the time is right. When I give the signal, I need you and the top 10 drivers to walk out together. Not a day before. You got it, boss, Marcus replied. The pieces were now fully set on the chessboard. My father and brother were sitting in their high tower, completely unaware that the foundation beneath them was made of sand, and I was about to trigger a landslide. They wanted to see what a distraction looked like. They were about to find out that a distraction can be a force of absolute devastation. 3 months after my brutal firing, the cracks in the Vance empire began to show in public. It started with a series of minor delivery delays for Apex Retail Group. Because Thomas had delayed the preventative maintenance on the delivery trucks to save a few $1,000s for his bonus pool, 3 major long-haul vehicles broke down on the interstate during a critical holiday rush. A delivery that was supposed to arrive at an Apex distribution center in Ohio at 6 a.m. didn't show up until 11 p.m. In the retail world, a 17-hour delay is an absolute eternity. It causes a chaotic domino effect that leaves store shelves completely empty, frustrates customers, and costs millions of dollars in lost revenue. The regional vice president of supply chain at Apex Retail, a notoriously strict and no-nonsense executive named Evelyn Vance, no relation to us, ironic as that was, called a high-urgency virtual meeting with the management of Vance Logistics. Through my contact, David, inside the IT department, I was able to listen to the audio recording of that fateful meeting. It was a beautiful, tragic symphony of incompetence. Arthur, Thomas, Evelyn's voice was as sharp as a razor blade over the speaker. Vance Logistics has missed 2 critical delivery windows this week alone. Our shelves in the Midwest region were completely bare for 12 hours. This is completely unacceptable. When Julian was running operations, we had a 99.8% on-time delivery rate for 3 consecutive years. What on earth is going on over there? I could hear Thomas clear his throat, his voice lacking all of the loud, arrogant bravado he had used against me in the corporate lobby. He sounded like a terrified schoolboy trying to make excuses to a principal. Look, Evelyn, it was just an isolated mechanical issue, Thomas stammered. A total freak accident with a couple of older trucks. We've already resolved it. It's completely under control. You have to understand, we are transitioning our management structure to a more modern, high-level approach. Julian was a bit outdated in his methods. We're optimizing the system. Optimizing? Evelyn snapped, completely cutting him off. Your optimization is costing me hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, Thomas. I don't care about your high-level approach or your modern transitions. I care about results. You have now triggered 2 official performance infractions. According to our corporate service level agreement, a 3rd infraction within this quarter will give us the immediate right to review and terminate this contract. Consider this your final written warning. Fix your operations, or we will find someone who can. The meeting ended abruptly with a loud click. Instead of taking this warning seriously, instead of humbling himself and rolling up his sleeves to fix the mechanical issues and support the drivers, Thomas did exactly what arrogant, weak men always do when they face immense pressure. He looked for someone else to blame, and he reacted with anger. The very next morning, Thomas stormed down to the dispatch floor, screaming at Marcus and the drivers. He accused them of being lazy, of intentionally sabotaging his management, and threatened to fire anyone who didn't work double shifts without overtime pay to make up for the lost time. If any of you losers causes another delay, I will personally see to it that you are blacklisted from the entire logistics industry. Thomas shouted, his face red with rage, slamming his fist on Marcus's desk. You work for me now. You do what I say when I say it. Do you understand me? Marcus, a proud man who had spent 30 years earning his spotless reputation, simply stood up, looked Thomas dead in the eye, and calmly nodded his head. Understood, Mr. Vance. The moment Thomas turned around and walked back to his private executive elevator, Marcus pulled out his personal cell phone and sent me a simple, single-word text message. Now, I was sitting in my brand-new corner office at Sterling Global when my phone buzzed on the desk. I looked down, read the text message, and felt a profound chill run down my spine. The time for waiting was officially over. The trap was ready to spring shut. I immediately picked up my office landline and dialed Lawrence Sterling's assistant. Tell Lawrence to prepare the emergency proposal paperwork for Apex Retail Group. The window is opening. Next, I dial Marcus back. Marcus, give the signal. It's time to bring them home. Within 2 hours, a wave of shockwaves rippled through the corporate headquarters of Vance Logistics. Marcus, along with the top 12 senior dispatchers and 40 of the company's most experienced licensed commercial drivers, walked into the HR office simultaneously. They placed their official resignation letters on the desk, effective immediately. They didn't ask for a counteroffer. They didn't complain. They didn't make a scene. They simply handed in their keys, walked out of the building, and drove directly over to the Sterling Global Recruitment Center, where their new, higher-paying employment contracts were already printed out and waiting for their signatures. Vance Logistics didn't just lose employees that afternoon. They lost their entire brain trust. They lost the people who knew the routes, the people who knew the clients, and the drivers who actually operated the trucks. The company's operational capacity dropped by an astounding 60% in a single afternoon. When my father, Arthur Vance, found out what had happened, he reportedly suffered a massive panic attack in his office. He and Thomas desperately tried to call emergency, temporary staffing agencies to hire replacement drivers. But temporary drivers don't know the intricate delivery routes. They don't have security clearance badges for the high-security Apex distribution centers, and they certainly don't care about the company's survival. The very next day was a Friday, the absolute busiest shipping day of the week for retail distribution. Millions of dollars worth of inventory was sitting on the loading docks of Vance Logistics, waiting to be moved. But there was no one to drive the trucks. The warehouse was descending into utter chaos. Box goods were piling up to the ceiling, blocking the aisles. Thomas was forced to get into a delivery truck himself to try and make an emergency delivery to the primary Apex hub in Chicago to avoid the catastrophic third infraction. But Thomas had never driven a heavy commercial vehicle in his entire life. He didn't understand the strict logging requirements. He got completely lost on the highway system, and he forgot to properly check the temperature controls on the refrigerated trailer. By the time Thomas finally arrived at the Chicago hub, 10 hours late, the entire shipment of perishable retail goods had spoiled inside the uncooled trailer. It was a complete, unmitigated disaster. Evelyn Vance from Apex Retail didn't even bother calling a virtual meeting this time. At 5 p.m. on that Friday evening, an official legal courier walked into the executive offices of Vance Logistics and delivered a formal, certified letter. Effective immediately, Apex Retail Group was terminating their contract with Vance Logistics due to multiple severe breaches of the performance agreement. They were clawing back their remaining payments, and they were preparing to file a massive multi-million-dollar lawsuit for property damage and lost retail sales. With that single letter, 40% of Vance Logistics' revenue vanished into thin air. The crown jewel of their empire was gone. And the best part? They had absolutely no idea that I was the one pulling the strings from the darkness. They thought they were just experiencing a run of terrible bad luck. They were about to find out that luck had absolutely nothing to do with it. When you cut off the head of a snake, the body thrashes violently before it finally dies. Over the weekend, the panic inside the Vance family home must have been absolutely suffocating. On Monday morning, the news of Apex Retail terminating its contract with Vance Logistics leaked to the local financial press. The corporate reputation that my grandfather had built and that I had saved from ruin was completely disintegrating in the public eye. I was sitting in my office at Sterling Global, quietly drinking my coffee when my phone rang. I looked down at the caller ID. It was my mother, Eleanor Vance. I hadn't heard a single word from her in over 3 months. When I was fired, when my savings were stolen, she hadn't sent a single text to ask if I had food to eat or if I could pay my rent. She had completely cut me off, choosing to stand by her husband and her golden boy Thomas. I let the phone ring 4 times before I picked it up. I pressed it to my ear, but I didn't say a word. I wanted her to speak first. Julian? Julian, darling, is that you? Her voice was frantic, pitched high with an artificial, desperate sweetness that made my stomach turn. Yes, Mother. It's me, I said, my voice as flat and smooth as a sheet of ice. Oh, thank goodness. She gasped, letting out a dramatic sob. Julian, it's a complete nightmare over here. The company, everything is falling apart. Thomas and your father are completely beside themselves. Some awful competitor named Sterling Global stole all of our best drivers, and Apex Retail has canceled our contract. We are facing absolute ruin, Julian. The banks are calling, threatening to default on our corporate loans. Your father's health is failing from the stress. I saw the news. Mother, I replied calmly. It's very unfortunate business management. Julian, you have to come home, she begged, her voice cracking with desperation. Your father and Thomas realized they made a little mistake with the restructuring. They were just under so much pressure. You see, they want you to come back as chief executive. They will give you your old job back, and we could be a happy family again. You can fix this, Julian. You're the smart one. You can save us. I took a slow sip of my coffee, listening to her beg. It was an extraordinary feeling. Just 3 months ago, Thomas had told me that my mother thought I was pathetic, a leech trying to steal family success. Now, she was calling me a savior. A little mistake, Mother? I asked, a faint, dangerous edge cutting into my voice. They didn't make a mistake. They deliberately met with a lawyer, used a legal loophole to steal my 30% equity, locked me out of my own personal life savings, and threatened to have me arrested by security for trying to collect my personal photos. And you agreed with them. You told them I was a leech. There was a sudden, sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Julian, no, darling, that's not true. I was just misinformed. Thomas told me. I don't care what Thomas told you, Mother. I interrupted her, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried the weight of absolute finality. The answer is no. I will never step foot inside that building again. And I will never help Arthur or Thomas ever again. Julian, how can you be so cold? She suddenly snapped, her artificial sweetness instantly evaporating, revealing the true, ugly arrogance underneath. We are your family. If the company goes under, we lose the family mansion. We lose our status. Do you want to see your own parents out on the street? You are a selfish, ungrateful child. You've always been jealous of Thomas, and now you're gloating over our misfortune. I let out a quiet, dark laugh. You still don't get it, do you? You think I'm gloating from the sidelines? Mother, look at the news again. Who do you think hired Marcus and the drivers? Who do you think designed the new logistics framework that is currently taking over all of your old regional routes? A heavy, terrifying silence fell over the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind as the horrifying realization began to dawn on her. What? What are you saying? She whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. I am the executive director of logistics at Sterling Global. Mother, I said clearly, enjoying every single syllable. I didn't just watch your empire fall. I am the one who pulled the foundation out from under you. You threw me out into the cold because you thought I was powerless. But you forgot that I was the one who built that house. And now, I'm taking back what's mine. Before she could scream, before she could sob, before she could say another word, I hung up the phone. I stood up from my desk, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window of my office, and looked out over the city. The feeling of vindication that rushed through my veins was intoxicating. It wasn't a feeling of wild, chaotic joy. It was the deep, profound satisfaction of an engineer watching a perfectly designed machine operate exactly as intended. But the game wasn't over yet. The final blow had to be delivered in person. The very next day, Sterling Global officially launched its emergency bid to take over the terminated Apex Retail Group contract. Because I had already prepared the parallel infrastructure, hired the best drivers, and optimized the pricing model. Our proposal was completely flawless. Evelyn Vance from Apex signed a contract with Sterling Global within 48 hours. We didn't just take their business, we completely absorbed it. To formalize the transition and finalize the acquisition of Vance's remaining regional warehouse facilities, which are now being forced into a fire sale to avoid total bankruptcy, a mandatory corporate liquidation meeting was called in a neutral legal office downtown. As the executive director of the acquiring firm, I was required to attend the signing. I knew my father and brother would be there. They had no choice. They had to sign over the deeds to their properties just to pay off their remaining bank debts and avoid immediate criminal prosecution for loan default. I put on my finest suit, a sharp, charcoal gray wool suit that fit me perfectly. I adjusted my tie, checked my watch, and walked out the door. It was time to look my betrayers in the eye one last time, not as a broken son or an outcast brother, but as their conqueror. The conference room on the 34th floor of the downtown high-rise was clinical, cold, and quiet. The walls were made of glass, overlooking the sprawling city below. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany table. When I walked through the door, accompanied by Lawrence Sterling and a team of 3 corporate attorneys, the atmosphere in the room instantly turned to ice. Sitting on the opposite side of the table were my father and Thomas. They looked like ghosts of their former selves. My father, Arthur, looked 10 years older. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were bloodshot and sunken, and his hands were visibly shaking as he clutched a pen. Thomas no longer looked like the smug, arrogant golden boy in the custom Italian suit. His tie was loose, his collar was wrinkled, and he was staring at the table, unable to look me in the eye. I sat down directly across from them. I folded my hands on the table and looked at them with a calm, expressionless gaze. "Julian," my father whispered, his voice cracking, a pathetic, desperate look in his eyes. "Please, can we talk privately? Just as a family? Before we sign these papers?" Lawrence Sterling looked at me, raising an eyebrow. I gave Lawrence a small nod. "Give us 5 minutes, Lawrence." Lawrence and the lawyers stood up, gathered their folders, and quietly walked out of the room, closing the heavy glass door behind them. The room descended into a suffocating silence. Thomas suddenly slammed his hands on the table, leaning forward, his face twisting into a mask of bitter, desperate rage. "Are you happy now, Julian? Look at us. You ruined us. You stole our drivers. You took our biggest contract. You turned the entire industry against us. You destroyed the family legacy. Grandfather built that company, and you destroyed it just out of spite." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. I simply leaned back in my chair and looked at my older brother with pure, unadulterated pity. "I didn't destroy anything, Thomas," I said, my voice quiet, steady, and deadly calm. "You did. You and Dad destroyed it the moment you decided that greed was more important than honor. You destroyed it when you sat in your office 3 months ago and told me that my 3 years of 18-hour days were just basic bookkeeping. You destroyed it when you stole my life savings and treated me like a criminal trespasser in the building I saved. We did what we had to do for the strategic direction of the firm." My father cried out, tears of anger and shame filling his eyes. "We were going to pay you back eventually, Julian. We just needed to consolidate the shares for the new investment round. We are your parents. We gave you life. How can you stand there and strip away everything we have?" "You didn't do it for the company, Dad," I said, opening a leather folder I had brought with me. I pulled out a stack of documents, the private financial audits from the offshore accounts that I had downloaded before I left. I slid them across the mahogany table, right in front of my father. "What is this?" My father stammered, his face turning an ash-gray color as he looked at the top page. "That is the complete forensic trail of the loan fraud you and Thomas committed 4 years ago," I said flatly. "The ghost clients, the inflated shipping volumes, the falsified bank metrics. I know everything, Dad. I've known for months." Thomas went completely pale, his mouth dropping open. He looked at the papers, then looked at me, terror finally replacing his rage. "Julian, please, We didn't give this to the feds, did you? Please tell me you didn't give this to the authorities. We'll go to prison. No, I said, pulling the papers back and sliding them securely into my folder. I didn't give them to the authorities. If I did, the bank would have frozen all your assets immediately, and Sterling Global wouldn't be able to buy your warehouse infrastructure today. I needed you to be able to sign these liquidation deeds so my new company can expand. I kept your secrets to protect my business interests, not yours. My father covered his face with his trembling hands and began to weep openly. It was a pathetic, crushing sight. The powerful, arrogant patriarch of the Vance family, reduced to tears of absolute defeat in a corporate conference room. So here's how this is going to go. I continued, leaning forward, my voice cutting through his soft sobs like a surgical scalpel. You're going to sign every single liquidation document on that table. You're going to sign over the deeds to the regional warehouses, the fleet management rights, and the logistics software to Sterling Global. In exchange, Sterling Global will pay off your remaining bank debts, which will save you from criminal prosecution for fraud and bankruptcy. I looked directly at Thomas, but you will walk away with absolutely nothing. The family mansion will be sold to cover the remaining personal guarantees. You, Thomas, will move out of your luxury apartment and hand over the keys to your company-funded sports car today. You and Dad are finished in this industry. Your names are toxic. No one will ever hire you. No one will ever trust you. And no one will ever do business with you again. Julian, please, Thomas whispered, a tear sliding down his cheek. We're brothers. You can't leave us with nothing. Give me a job at Sterling. Anything. A mid-level manager, a supervisor. I need to pay my rent, Julian. Please. I looked at my brother, remembering the exact words he had spoken to me in the corporate lobby 3 months ago. A cold, dark sense of poetic justice washed over me. I'm sorry, Thomas, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. But business is business. You just don't have the image for a multi-million-dollar corporation. We need leadership with charisma. And frankly, your presence would simply be a distraction. Thomas looked as if I had struck him physically across the face. He slouched back into his chair, completely broken, his eyes vacant and dead. I stood up, walked over to the glass door, and opened it. Lawrence, the lawyers. You can come back in now. We're ready to sign. The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of scratching pens and rustling paper. My father and brother signed away their entire life's work, their legacy, and their fortune with trembling hands. When the last page was signed, the notary stamped the documents with a heavy, final thud. It was officially over. Vance Logistics was dead. Sterling Global was now the undisputed king of the regional market, and I was the man holding the keys to the kingdom. My father and Thomas stood up slowly, looking like broken, hollow shells. They didn't say another word. They didn't look at me. They simply walked out of the conference room, their heads bowed in total defeat, sliding out of my life forever. I stood by the window, watching them walk out of the building on the street below, two tiny, insignificant figures disappearing into the crowded city sidewalks. I thought I would feel an overwhelming rush of anger or a chaotic sense of triumph. But instead, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The storm had finally passed, and the air was completely clear. 2 years have passed since that cold afternoon in the downtown high-rise. The corporate world moves at a breathtaking pace, and the name Vance Logistics has completely faded into a distant, forgotten memory. Today, the logo on the trucks that move across the country reads Sterling Vance Global. Lawrence Sterling kept his promise. I am now a full senior partner, owning a massive 25% equity stake in a multi-million-dollar corporate empire that spans across 5 states. I moved out of my small, rainy apartment a long time ago. I live in a beautiful, quiet home overlooking the river. I have a life built on true security, financial freedom, and above all, deep professional respect. I occasionally get updates about my biological family, though I have completely severed all communication with them. My father and mother were forced to sell the family estate and move into a small, rented two-bedroom condo in a quiet retirement community hours away from the city. Their high society friends, the people they valued so much over their own son, completely abandoned them the moment the money ran out. Thomas, the golden boy who could do no wrong, is currently working as a mid-level car salesman at a used dealership in a small town. He lives paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay off the massive personal debts he accumulated during his years of reckless luxury. The crown has been stripped away from the king, and he is finally forced to live a life of a worker bee, the very life he mocked me for. Sometimes when I'm sitting on my terrace in the evening, watching the sunset over the water, I reflect on the journey that brought me here. I think about that devastating Tuesday night when I sat at my kitchen table, crying over a termination notice, feeling like my entire world had ended. If I could go back in time and speak to that broken, crying version of myself, what would I tell him? I wouldn't tell him to dry his tears. I wouldn't tell him that everything happens for a reason. I would tell him to embrace the pain. I would tell him that the betrayal he is feeling in that exact moment is not the end of his story. It is the fuel. It is the fire that will forge him into something completely unbreakable. You see, the people who betray you, the people who use your loyalty and love as a weapon against you, always make one fatal mistake. They believe that their cruelty is a demonstration of their power. They believe that because they can break your heart, they can control your destiny. But they don't understand the law of harvest. They don't understand that when you plant seeds of malice, deceit, and greed, you will eventually be forced to eat the bitter fruit of the harvest you created. My family didn't ruin my life. They simply freed me from the chains of false loyalty that was keeping me small. They forced me to realize my own strength. Revenge is a word that many people find ugly or negative. They say you should just forgive and forget, that you should take the high road and let karma do the work. But I believe that sometimes you are the instrument of karma. Sometimes true justice requires you to stand up, dust yourself off, and use the intellect, data, and talent that God gave you to dismantle the empires of corrupt men. But the most important lesson I learned through this entire experience is this. True revenge is not about destroying others. True revenge is about rebuilding yourself. If I had spent the last 2 years screaming, fighting in court, or trying to hurt my brother physically, I would still be trapped in their toxic orbit. I would still be their victim, consumed by their darkness. Instead, I channeled that freezing resolve into building something magnificent. I focused on excellence, on honor, and on protecting the people who actually do the work. I took back what was mine, not just the money, not just the contracts, and not just the corporate title. I took back my dignity. I took back my self-worth. And I took back my future. The wolves are no longer at my table. The wolves have been cast out into the cold, where they belong. And as for me, I am finally living a life built on a foundation that no one can ever steal from me again. A foundation of true, earned success. Thank you for listening to my story. If you are currently sitting in the dark, feeling the burning pain of a betrayal from the people you trusted most, remember this. Do not cry for the house that burned down. Look at the ashes, find the blueprint, and build a castle that no one can ever tear down. Your story is not over. It is just about to begin.